everyone, in this video we're going to talk about the underlying reasons of why we eat what we eat. I'm going to focus on the different factors that most of us aren't aware of. Why? Because I work with a lot of people who are trying to make dietary changes, whether it's for weight loss, for weight gain, or for other health reasons. We want to know the underlying reasons of why our body is deciding the foods it's craving, why we want to eat what we eat, and why we do eat what we eat. It's through this understanding that we're actually going to be able to formulate a better behavior path. In other words, figure out what are the changes and how can we make them so they actually work for you. And to do that, we have to understand, okay, what are the factors at play that are deciding what we eat, and how can we begin to manipulate or change some of these factors in order to walk that path to health and wellness and all things good. Okay, to do this, I prepared a massive flowchart, but before we get into that, I just want to say I do have a background in psychology and nutrition, so finding the links between these worlds is a passion of mine. Making dietary changes is basically behavior change applied to diet. Anyways, this video is going to be long enough, so without further delay, let's dive right into why we eat what we eat. So let's get into what's going on. So in short, our biology is trying to survive and reproduce. So first we'll just talk about the Stone Age environment, as in before we had farming, well before we had refrigerators, and well before we had DoorDash and Uber Eats. So we're just going to talk about biology generally, and what our biology is trying to do is it's trying to survive so we can reproduce and make babies, and those babies can survive and repeat the cycle. And in order to survive, we need energy, and that's where food comes in. Well, getting energy is key because we're not like plants. We can't just sit there in the sun, gathering the sun's energy like a bunch of trees. As much as I wish I could just do that, I can't do that. I can never be a beautiful oak tree or a redwood. We actually have to move around and find these calories. So one of our main features of our biology is actually to be able to detect calorie density. So when it comes to detecting calorie density, we have a little scale here. We can see that we have greens, as in if we were to go outside right now and, I don't know, try eating some leaves off a tree or something like that, those leaves aren't going to taste very good. Meanwhile, if we have a piece of fruit, it tastes quite good. And as we move up that calorie density, we'll see that foods tend to taste better. So what our taste receptors and our tongues and our brains are trying to do, it's trying to pick up calorie density. And I'll do this in a few different ways. So right when we taste something, we can taste the sugar or the saltiness. While salt doesn't have calories itself, it does indicate that, hey, this is richer food. And afterwards, our body also picks up how much carbohydrate, fat, or protein was in that food, as in it's looking for nutrient density as well. How concentrated are those macronutrients in that food? I'll mention this briefly, but the key reason why I have calorie density instead of just calories is because of that volume component. Our bodies aren't just looking for calories, but it's also looking for volume. As in, if we just eat a pound of nuts and seeds, even though we can get 2,600 calories, that's not enough volume. 1 pound is usually not enough for most people. So we'll still be hungry even though we got all the calories we need. And because our bodies are able to detect calorie density, we need to optimize our behavior path to get these resources. And in this case, we're talking about food. And ultimately, this will lead to survival. Now, for biology, you can see that I split it up into two different sections. I have general biology, which again is aimed at, you could say, survival and reproduction, and it's what we share with other people. And then I also have your biology personality. When it comes to personality, we'll talk about this a little bit more later in this video, but I'm talking about the built-in biases and preferences that we have for behavior paths. As in, what's our brain's, you could say, intuitive strategy when it comes to getting those resources. And again, in this case, we're just going to keep it to food. So a quick note on the foods that were available to our ancestors before we had farming and other modern technology. We, of course, had greens available, so vegetables. We had fruit. We had starchy vegetables. We also have whole grains. Then we have legumes. And after that, we have meat. And then there's a pretty significant gap. And then we have nuts and seeds, which sit at the highest calorie density. And of course, these foods vary seasonally, and our ancestors went through periods where there was nothing available, so they simply starved. Okay, so now is when things get kind of crazy. Believe it or not, this is me trying to keep it simple. So first we have, as you can see, I have put an indicator now for Stone Age environment. So now we have two different scales. We have the Stone Age scale, ranging from greens to nuts and seeds. And we have the modern environment scale, which we still have greens all the way at the bottom. But now, as we'll see, after meat, we have sugar and protein at 4 calories per gram. So think table sugar and protein powders. We have cheese, usually about 1,800 to 2,000 calories per pound. We still have our nuts and seeds. But now we also have a brand new food. And we're going to call that crap, as in calorie rich and processed foods. And when it comes to crap, the point of crap is basically to reach this bliss point, which we'll get into a little bit. I know a part of this screen is cut off right now, so that's intentional because we're going to get into all that later. And at the very end of the scale, we have oil, and oil is about 4,000 calories per pound because fat is 9 calories per gram. So we can see that through modern agriculture and our amazing factories and human invention, we have been able to concentrate calories and create these new foods. So let's jump around a little bit and get into this optimizing behavior path to resources piece again. As we can see, I have added another box there, satiety. And the reason I add satiety is because ultimately what we're trying to do as far as we're concerned is just feel full. And that feeling full ensures survival. In the same way, we're trying to have sex to reproduce, right? But that survival and reproduction is a very background goal, but feeling full is what we're after. We can also see that I added Dr. Lyle's motivational triad here, which in short is to seek pleasure, as in eat food, get endorphins, feel good, avoid pain, which can also just be the discomfort of hunger, and to conserve energy. Basically, the way our body is designed is to get more calories for less work. So yeah, we got a bit of built-in laziness. Okay, panning to the right now, we'll also see that I have Dr. Lyle's pleasure trap. So this motivational triad in the Stone Age environment to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and conserve energy works incredibly well, which is why we have these circuits. If it didn't work well, then our ancestors wouldn't have survived and we wouldn't have these internal circuits in our brain. As we can see, when we take this motivational triad and we apply it to our modern environment, well, that's when we run into problem territory. And the reason we run into problem territory is because of something we're going to call a pleasure trap. So now we can see a graph of Dr. Lyle's pleasure trap to the right here. So at baseline, just imagine eating fruits, vegetables, starchy vegetables, legumes, a bit of meat. So to best illustrate this pleasure trap, I often share the story of when I went to Europe in 2019. So before this Europe trip, just picture me eating beans and rice. So lower calorie density foods, which is better aligned with what our ancestors would have ate. And during this Europe trip, I found myself in Venice in a gelato shop. Well, I saw the gelato there, I decided, you know what, I'm not doing the unhealthy desserts yet, so I passed. But the second day in Venice, I found myself in a different gelato shop, and this gelato shop had this beautiful chocolate gelato just staring at me and calling my name. So I said, one scoop can't hurt. And that was that more pleasurable experience we're going to see up there. That scoop took me sky high. So while the rest of my friends took a train in Rome, I flew there with that very scoop. But now, while I'm in Rome, I'm having 3-4 scoops of gelato after dinner. At this point, I got used to it, which psychologists call neuroadaptation. And at this point, I was starting to feel a little crappy. So I went to a supermarket and I bought a tub of spinach. And when I had that spinach, it tasted so much worse than before. It tasted bitter rather than this like nice neutral kind of bite to it. And I struggled to stomach it down. I did not want to have another bite of that. I was effectively going through withdrawal. And in order to get back to the previous baseline, I actually need to stick to eating those foods so my system can readapt to it. A process that sometimes can take many months. So this is the same curve that we get for other pleasurable experiences, even coffee. We're at baseline, we have some coffee, we get used to the coffee, then we gotta go through caffeine withdrawal and to get back to baseline. And this pleasure trap is actually the reason why it's so hard to eat healthy. Now, when it comes to this pleasure trap, I just want to briefly talk about this calorie-rich and processed food that we have in our environment. So the reason I never had gelato the first day in Venice is because I was doing my best to avoid combinations of sugar, fat, salt. It's one thing to have these separately, but when they're together, they hit the system quite hard. So gelato is basically sugar and fat, and as we'll see, most favorite foods are usually a combination of these. The bliss point just refers to processed packaged foods. The industry has figured out this bliss point when you combine sugar, fat, salt, and free glutamate that pretty much makes food irresistible, which is why they advertise it as bet you can't just have one, right? In other words, this food is hijacking our body's built-in circuitry and it's fueling it to the point where we just keep overeating it. I also have high fructose corn syrup. That's what the HFCS stands for. And high fructose corn syrup is a man-made processed form of sugar that has a higher ratio of fructose compared to glucose. When it comes to fructose and glucose, just know that fructose is 1.5 times sweeter than glucose. Okay, so before we talk about the lifestyle and environmental side of things, let's talk about what's going on underneath, which is our own unique personality. So when I talk about personality, I'm not talking about the behavior I see. So generally when people talk about personality, it's very behavior focused. But what I'm interested in is those built-in biases and preferences, as in that built-in genetically determined personality piece. And when it comes to that, one of the better models is the Big 5 Ocean model. So very quickly, Ocean stands for O, openness, C, conscientiousness, E, extroversion, A, agreeableness, and N, neuroticism. So when it comes to each of these and food, for openness, you can think of novelty seeking. So how much variety does someone want in their diet versus having routine. I know people that eat the same foods every single day, and I know people that want to have a different breakfast, lunch, and dinner and don't want to have leftovers the next day. And when it comes to conscientiousness, we have a few different pieces at play here. We have risk aversion overall, as in how much are they like me, how much are they terrified of dying, how cautious are they, and how much risk are they willing to tolerate when it comes to their dietary decisions. You're not going to catch me at a bar with more than a glass of water, put it that way. Work ethic also plays a role when it comes to the food we select. Some food just involves more work, whilst other foods are quite convenient. And as well as organization. Being organized can be quite helpful when it comes to what we eat. Next up, we have extroversion. This one's very self-explanatory. Are you going out, going to social parties, eating a lot of meals out, or are you mostly staying at home? I should mention for each of these that it is a bell curve, so some people are going to be on either extremes, while most people are going to be somewhere in the middle. For agreeableness on the food side of the equation, it's how hard is it to say no? Are you able to say no when your sweet, lovely grandmother is offering you her delicious homemade cookies? Or how about when there's a work party and the whole office is ordering pizza and they're celebrating someone's birthday? Are you going to just pull out your lame lunch and sit there? Or are you going to join in? And last, we have narcissism or emotional stability. This is basically how likely are you going to have emotion-driven eating. Sometimes this can result in binge eating or other disordered eating patterns. Now, importantly, when it comes to personality, it's important to recognize that this gets blended up into a huge soup, right? So you can be very agreeable, but maybe you're incredibly conscientious, and that presents you as being more disagreeable. You can be very emotionally unstable, but if life is otherwise going great, then you're just simply enjoying the highs, and you may not actually fall into that emotion-driven eating piece at all. Or maybe when you get stressed out, you're not hungry and you're exactly the opposite. You don't eat anything at all. So it's not necessarily these factors mean, oh, it's going to be like this every single time. I'm just pointing out all the factors that influence what we eat. Okay, so let's jump into the lifestyle piece. So just so you know, anytime I have arrows coming up, it's always referring to something that was always mentioned, and it's always going back to biology. So when it comes to that lifestyle piece, I'm basically talking about the external environment. And we can see we have this little scale going from long-term versus short-term. So as we covered, the way our Stone Age brain is built, it's built for that short-term goal of eating the calorie-rich foods, right? And when we don't, our brain protests, and sometimes it's screaming and yelling at us. And then any long-term goal we have, maybe for our weight or for our health, we know that direction is somewhere opposite of that calorie-rich food. But these two goals are in direct conflict with each other. And as we saw when it comes to that pleasure trap situation, unfortunately that short-term goal often wins. But because of this underlying dilemma, we're going to be prone and get into this deception piece. So when it comes to the deception piece, sometimes we're just barking up the wrong tree. As in, to alleviate that internal dilemma, someone has told us that, hey, fat's actually not that bad for you, and in fact, you need to eat butter and fried foods and so on. And that because of that, we can feel nice and full and satisfied. Or maybe you tried to over-restrict those foods or relying on supplements, but someone has told us that, hey, that short-term and long-term dilemma that seems to be in your head, you're actually just mistaken. And you just need to do X, Y, and Z, right? We've all heard some sort of form of this, and the unfortunate reality is when it comes to eating healthier, when it comes to eating more in line with our genetics and the environment we were designed for, it involves hard work to go against our circuits and involves effort on our end to understand the path forward and to put the effort in, right? But this is not that video. We're just talking about reasons of why we eat what we eat. So one is this deception piece where others more or less, or the external environment has sort of deceived us on what might be the best path. The other piece is self-deception. I don't have this on the graph, but there's also a self-licensing trap that happens where sometimes we're doing quite well, which means that we feel that we deserve some calorie-rich treat or something like that. Now for this deception piece, I also have what the hell there. What the hell is basically a short-term effect when we indulge a little bit that basically has us going, what the hell, I'll just start over tomorrow. It's just another shortcut to alleviate the conflict between the long-term versus short-term goals. And because of this conflict, there can also be a lot of self-deception going on, but that's a story for another day. And importantly, a large reason why we have fad diets beyond ourselves just trying to figure out the best path forward is because that's where the money's made. The money's made in supplements, the money's made in selling people approaches that don't work so they remain customers for life. And unfortunately, this is where others are profiting off your misery. And in some ways, I'm profiting off your misery as well. But the real money is made hitting that bliss point, being pleasure trapped, and being sold these quick fixes that often lead to long-term suffering. Okay, let's jump deeper into this lifestyle piece and talk about 24 hours. 24 hours is just my way of saying that, hey, there's only so many hours in a day. So right away, that gets into the time, money available, and the food environment. So if there's no healthy options nearby, if none of the grocery stores carry anything healthy, then we're more or less screwed, to be honest, especially if we don't have time and money available to get those healthier options. And again, those up arrows means it feeds right back into that pleasure trap situation and our built-in preference for calorie-rich food. So we can see here that 24 hours goes right into learning. Learning I split off into two different categories, situational or temporal. So when it comes to learning, in other words, I'm talking about conditioning. So for situational, you can think of when you turn on a movie or go to the movies, you have a craving for popcorn. We can also have temporal conditioning, as in if we eat breakfast every day at 8, lunch at 12, dinner at 6, then at those times we're going to feel hungry. And the reason we're going to feel hungry is because food is ultimately a stressor to our body. We actually have to prepare for that food, and to do that we drop our blood sugars and we have these sometimes very intense cravings, and sometimes we get a little hangry too. But there's also something, and both of these lead into something called the cramp circuit. This is also a concept by Dr. Lyle. The cramp circuit basically says that, hey, if there's calorie rich food around, go eat it. And this is something I'll have a separate video out on as well. But basically it goes cue, craving, response, reward. And it goes something like this. Let's just say after dinner, you treat yourself with a little piece of chocolate. And the second day, well, there's that chocolate bar is still there, so you have a little bit more. And the third day, a little bit more. But now we're gonna find ourselves developing a tricky situation here. Because now feeling full, having that dinner is actually gonna be the cue to cause craving for that chocolate. And our response is gonna be to get it, and the reward is gonna be the chocolate. Ultimately, if we do this enough, it'll actually just form habits. Habits are just neural shortcuts our brain takes. And sometimes these habits can be quite tricky to what we can say break. This cramp circuit piece, as far as I've seen, is incredibly common. Most people have some sort of form of it. And we definitely have situational and temporal conditioning as well. And these are huge factors when it comes to what we eat and also when we eat. Okay, so breaking that day, those 24 hours, I hope that you, my listeners, spend a good portion of it sleeping. Sleep and exercise are also factors when it comes to eating a poor night's sleep might cause you to eat more, it might cause you to eat less. Again, that can vary. And exercise, as we know, does have a bit of an appetite increasing effect. But sometimes if we get some exercise in, that can also give us a nice dose of endorphins, and it can actually lead us to making much healthier or different dietary decisions. So that also influences what we can eat. And these factors ultimately piece into what we can say stress management. We can also see that our personality, especially that neuroticism piece, feeds into our social life. It sometimes shapes our social life, as in where we work, who we work with, our outside circle of friends, romance partners, and family. And ultimately, the social piece feeds into stress management. It can help us reduce stress or sometimes be the cause of the stress, whether it's more and more negative direction or even a positive direction. Influences what we eat, right? It can also influence our emotions. And when it comes to the emotional side of things, it's important to recognize it's not just feeling sad, lonely, or anxious. Sometimes we can also be feeling quite happy, and we want to celebrate that with food. Again, remember, the arrows are going up, so we're going back to our biology. When it comes to that Stone Age brain, just put simply, it's never a bad idea to eat. Eating is always going to make us feel good for the most part, unless we completely overdo it. And in that case, we'll have a little bit of pain circuitry that's saying that, hey, you ate too much, you can't move, a lion might eat you. But that's usually not the case, as we know. I also point out here that I see a lot of people, especially in the modern world, that are socially isolated. And the way I see it is, we're always meant to have other people relatively inside or near us. Anytime we're socially isolated, even if there's other people in the house, even like right now when I'm recording and I know there's people upstairs, you can picture a little bit of background stress in my brain that's saying that, hey, something might not be quite right here. And this is going to drive, especially as we get later in the day, and it's going to drive us to basically eat food and eat calorie-rich food, because that calorie-rich food is going to signal to our brain that, hey, it's all okay, we're all good right now, we're going to get a nice source of endorphins, and it's going to give us a bit of relaxation. So remember, socially isolated human will want to eat. I've seen it all the time. And sometimes this leads into binge eating, and sometimes this can lead into binge eating and other behaviors, which definitely influences what we eat. And as we'll see, the next box is very straightforward. We get pleasure when we eat, just like that Dr. Lyle's motivational triad told us. So let's go back to this learning piece. So we also have previous experience, in other words, memories. We might have cultural aspects, we might have food aversions, we might have sensitivities we've learned over time, and all these influence what we eat as well. And these ultimately get into the external environment. So getting into the external environment now, we're going to see factors that many of us are well familiar with, such as religion, including different rituals, social influence from our peers and media as a whole, any health concerns we may have, and some of us may also be driven by environmental concerns or ethical concerns as well that influence what we eat. Now, I could have expanded to these factors, but these factors ultimately are going to influence what we eat when it comes to that scale of calorie density, and hence feed right back into our biology as well. Okay, let's get into the consequences. Because we're surrounded by calorie-rich food and foods that are designed for us to overeat with these bliss points, these high fructose corn syrup containing foods, unfortunately, we're going to be very vulnerable to this pleasure trap situation, and that's going to have consequences. Those consequences are disease related. We see a plethora of lifestyle diseases now. I was actually going to make a list of them, but I decided, why flood my beautiful flowchart with a list? So we see heart disease, diabetes, cancers, and so on. We also see weight-related concerns, which unfortunately goes right into our self-esteem. And ultimately, this self-esteem mixed with our personalities, who we are, is actually going to influence what we eat as well. Last, I've said this before, but it's not always low self-esteem is going to drive us to eat one direction, high self-esteem is going to drive us to eat another direction. It totally depends on the person and situation they're in. And as we can see, there's a lot of underlying factors here that aren't usually discussed, which is why I made this video. I want to summarize all of these so we can have a bit of a more cohesive framework. As you can see, I have a very engineering brain when it comes to this, so I hope that some of you found value in this video. And honestly, I could make a video covering each of these pieces. And this video is just meant to be a quick overview of this flowchart. If people are interested, I can put a link of it to download it. I know it's not a perfect flowchart. I'll probably update it as the months and years go on, but I just wanted to get this out there so that others can have a better framework of understanding why we eat what we eat. This is Andy with Baines Nutrition. Did you find this video interesting? Was it helpful? Did you learn anything new? I'd love to hear your thoughts about it in the comment section below. If you want to learn more about the interplay between nutrition, health, and psychology, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It's probably, I'm gonna take a guess. Is it over here? Or is it over here? Or maybe it's over here now? See you next time.